What's up, everybody? Welcome to Take No Offense. A couple of old friends who grew up together in Pennsylvania. Now we live on opposite sides of the country. So, this is our chance to get together every week to talk about news, politics, sports, TV, and movies. I'm Eric Messersmith in the Los Angeles area. That is Brian Johnson in suburban Washington, D.C. What's up, buddy?
Not much, dude. I missed you last week, but you came back and your hair, it's incredible.
Yes, it's this is for those
You're
watching on
like six
YouTube.
foot nine with this hair.
This is longer than I usually go. It's gotten into the uncomfortable. Like I'm a little uncomfortable
Hmm,
with the length. That's what she said. But I'm feel like it's time for a
it's
trim.
awful.
That I feel like we spend more time talking about my hair on this podcast. Not that we spend a lot, but I feel like more than zero is too much because it's not that impressive.
I disagree
But you
strongly. We don't disagree on this podcast a lot. I strongly disagree on this.
strongly disagree. All right. I am blessed, hashtag
Oh,
blessed to be
hashtag
45 and
blessed.
still have a thick, full head of hair.
Yes, sir.
All right, Brian. Speaking of blessed, Harrison Butker, who is the kicker of the Kansas City Chiefs, he would certainly describe himself as blessed. He's a wealthy man. He's one of the best kickers in the NFL, multiple time Super Bowl champion. Well, he's in the news not for that, but he's been in the news over the last week. Unless you're living under a rock, you probably have heard this story. He is Catholic. He gave the commencement address at Benedictine College in Kansas, which is a Catholic university. I actually have a small tie to Benedictine in that I used to cover when I lived in rural Missouri. I used to cover Central Methodist universities and do commentary for their football games, and they were in the same conference as Benedictine. So I believe I've been to Benedictine College.
Well,
Anywho,
and you also received the prestigious Eagle of the Cross award.
I did. That's true.
I think that is worth mentioning as part of this conversation.
From my days as a Catholic altar, I was an altar boy through high school, actually.
Yeah.
Catholic school, kindergarten through sixth grade. I received, as you mentioned, an award for my service, the prestigious Eagle of the Cross award when I was a teenager. I didn't really deserve it, but I won it anyway.
No.
Anyhow, uh, the reason that this is all ties together is because Butker gave a speech, and it's a lengthy speech, but I'll just read a quick excerpt to set the stage. Before I do that, let me preface this by saying he talked about a lot of topics: COVID,
Yes.
Joe Biden, gay and lesbian rights, transgenderism. But I think, at least what I saw on social media, none of that got anywhere near the pushback of the things he talked about regarding women and homemaking. That seemed to be the source of most of the controversy that I saw. So I'll just read a quote from the speech on that topic. He said, quote, "I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you. Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabella, would be the first to say her life truly started when she started living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. I'm on this stage today able to be the man that I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation." I will acknowledge up front, I did not hear the whole speech. I have seen various excerpts and clips, and that is how I will form my opinion, like most of America. Brian, you first, though. Give me your thoughts. We know that you are a super religious man
Oh,
who attends
geez.
services weekly. So tell us that's a lie. Tell
Oh,
us your
God.
thoughts.
Yeah, that is certainly a lie. So for people that are listening who maybe don't know, I feel about religion, I would say the closest person to my beliefs is Bill Maher. So if you've ever watched Religulous or heard him talk about religion, we're pretty close.
So you're like atheist or atheist adjacent, maybe.
I'm agnostic. I think
You're
that's how.
agnostic. I would describe myself as agnostic too. So there you go. That's two agnostic guys talking about religious comments.
So, um, but like yourself, I grew up in a religious household. I'm sure a lot of people our age did. We were kind of the last generation of that, growing up in where going to church was kind of like the norm. I don't think I don't think that's the case anymore. I mean, in terms of numbers, I mean the numbers are there. If I don't mean to sound ridiculous, but look them
No,
up.
I think
Church
I think
attendance
that's
is way
probably true.
down.
Yeah. It's
you
way
know?
down. I think it may have been the generation after us as well that kind of got in on that, but it really dropped. If you look at the people that describe themselves as religious, it cratered in the early 2000s. It started to drop, and the drop was precipitous. Up until then, it remained very high and consistent for decades in terms of people
Oh,
self-identifying
sure.
as religious.
Yeah, I just wanted to frame it because you kind of set it up there. I just wanted to be clear, kind of what my perspective was, so people understood maybe some of the comments that I'll make about it. I would also think it's, I find it necessary in this type of conversation to say, like, I think religious groups, particularly in the United States, community organizations do tremendous work within their communities on all different types of things. That has nothing to do with their religious belief. I'm just talking about, air quote, the good that is done within communities. Like, I think that should be recognized too as part of the conversation. I think what Harrison Butker said, and I couldn't listen to the whole thing. I find it really hard to listen to, but I did read the entire excerpt. And to your point, he talks about any number of things. And I guess I'll just land my plane by saying this is the problem with like fundamental religion in general. Like, he's telling everybody else like how to be a Catholic instead of letting them form their own way, they may feel to be Catholic. Like, his basic premise of this entire speech is like, hey, just kind of being a wishy-washy Catholic, that's no good. Yeah, we'll take your money. Obviously, it's still green, but like, I just want you to know that's not good enough. If you don't believe exactly what I believe and the way that I believe it, then you're doing this thing wrong. And that's my major issue. But like, I mean, because he talks about the masculinity of men in here, along with, his 1940s view of women in the world. So it's, a lot of just, like I said, hard line religion. So of course people are going to have a problem with it. That doesn't mean I have a problem with him saying it. And honestly, I don't care what the punter for the Kansas City Chief thinks, but
Kicker.
to each their own. Punter, kicker, whatever.
Yeah. Look, free speech. I'm big on free speech,
Yeah.
so people should say what they want to say. And this is a view that doesn't really I mean, it gets represented in religious conservative circles, but in terms of like popping through to the mainstream, as you mentioned, with a decline in religiosity in America, you don't hear it as much. So in that regard, I'm all for letting 1,000 flowers bloom in the world of speech. Let people share their opinions.
He said
I
it in
will
the right
say,
setting too, though. That's
right,
the other important part.
Catholic,
Is this was
right.
I mean,
And it seemed like
yeah,
from the clips I saw, it was well received by the
yeah,
crowd there.
18-second ovation.
Yeah, he was preaching to the choir, so to speak.
Yeah.
And look, here's the thing. I grew up Catholic, so I know that there's a lot of cafeteria Catholics. I was once this before I kind of left the church, where you kind of picked and chose what you liked about the church and the religion and discarded the rest. Now, you're free to do that, and I don't have any problem with anybody doing that or not doing that. But I will say it is a bit hypocritical to be like, oh yeah, I'm a Catholic, but I'm only a Catholic on these things. Say what you will about Harrison Butker, but like, he's all in, right? Like, he's like, hey, this is what the
But
Bible
people that are all
says.
in on any religion is a bit of a problem. It's like
It
the people that
me.
like literally read the Constitution and are like, I don't know, I have the right to bear arms. I should have a nuclear arsenal if I want one, because that's what the Constitution says. Like, that's basically fundamental religion.
It's true. That is true, but there is a true believer, and it's a believer who doesn't just believe it as in, oh, I think this is what God says, which he does, but it's also clearly what he was doing is saying, this is how you should, meaning, I think this is best for the way people should live and how society should be organized.
And as you're talking about it, I have rage building up inside.
Yeah, look, you're free to make that argument. It's not an argument I would make for many reasons. First of all, you're talking to an audience of accomplished people who probably should make the decisions they want to make for their own life, particularly when it comes to reproductive rights. And I'll focus on that, because the rest of the stuff that we mentioned, the Biden stuff, the COVID stuff, a lot of that's like boilerplate. That wasn't why this touched a nerve. This touched a nerve because of the line about, you women here, I'm paraphrasing, basically saying, yeah, careers are nice, but you should raise children, and kind of implying, I don't think he actually said this, but implying the best way to raise children is what his wife did, which is to make your vocation a homemaker, right?
Yeah.
So that part of the argument, to me, A, I don't agree with it, but B, I don't think it's effective for what he's trying to do. And let me explain. I think his goal is a noble goal, which is to say family is important, raising children is important, and we need to make it more of a priority in addition to chasing our careers. I think that is what he was trying to get at, and I agree with all of that. But I think the way to do it is not to use the homemaking example like
Right.
this is 1960 or 1950, right? I think the way to do it is to say, men and women, if you are, it's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to go after your career. It's okay to want to be successful. But while you're doing that, if you think you might want to have kids someday, also carve out some time to try to build a family and to have kids and try to balance those things because it's not easy to do for men and women. I think where he fell flat for me was focusing so much on the old school, the man has
Yeah.
to work, the woman should stay at home and take care of the kids, rather than telling people, hey, everybody, male or female, should consider the trade-offs and sacrifices that need to be made in order to be a good parent. And you should, throughout your working career, think about those things and not always prioritize your career. If you want a family, prioritize the family and children.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand why you can't have both. To your point, like male or female. Like I know I've spent a lot of time with my wife having this exact conversation where it's like, okay, well, I want to go to work. I need to provide for my family, but I also need to spend time with my kids. Uh, and I think that's an important conversation that everyone should have with their spouse. It's like, hey, how are we going to divide the labor here in terms of taking care of children? I mean, look, I know not everyone has the luxury of choosing, certain times in their life when they had children, but I do know for myself, I waited until I was older to have kids. Well, why did I do that? Because I wanted to be a place in my life where I was financially secure. I was in a leadership position in my workplace, and I could create the flexibility that I needed so I could spend time with my children. I'm not saying I did it perfectly. I'm just saying that these were conversations that I had with my wife prior to us having
Right.
children.
You
So
didn't
like I
say,
said,
honey, if we're going to have kids, you're staying home.
right, right. Yeah, that would have been actually, I mean, not to make it personal, I
Get in the
guess I'm
kitchen.
the one that did, but like, I think I'd be very disappointed if my wife was just a homemaker. If you have something to offer the world and you can make like a meaningful difference in the world and not like you can be a great mother and still be incredibly talented at something and produce
Right.
some value greater than child rearing. I don't know. I guess that's why I have such a problem with what I said. It's like you have this choice. Like it's one or the other. Like, no, there's a way you can do both.
Right. I think, and what the problem with Harrison Butker's view, and I think he echoes the view of many very religious people, is this idea that these gender roles are so rigid. And if
Yeah.
anything about the last 50 years of American life have taught us anything, it should be that they're not. And the only reason they were for so long is because we basically suppressed women by not allowing them to do things. I mean, it's crazy to think women literally couldn't get a credit card. Single women could not apply for a credit card up
Yeah.
until like 50 years ago. I mean, that is crazy. Bank loans were almost impossible to get for single women. Women were treated as second-class citizens. Like that's literally true. And this wasn't in the 1800s. This was in the last century, like in the lifetime of our parents. Women, it's not that they were barred from medical school or law school, but it was thought of as a path that they shouldn't take. Very few even tried, and very few went. Now, fast forward, 20, 30 years, women make up half or more of the graduating classes every year in medical schools and law schools. So that just is evidence that it wasn't that women weren't drawn to those areas because they were women. It was because we were pressuring them in society to not do it, right? Now that those pressures have largely been done away with, you see what's happened. And so that just shows you these rigid gender roles are so dumb. And so what the message, if you want people to have kids and focus more on the family in terms of if you think it's better for their personal happiness, or there's a movement right now to try to increase the birth rate because our birth rate in America has dropped below replacement level. and in most other developed countries as well. And so you're going to have a situation where in a lot of countries, you're going to have a lot of old people pretty soon and
Yeah.
not many workers. And that's bad for societies. That leads to problems. So I think it is a worthy goal to say, hey, we should think about having more kids. But the way to do that is not to say, well, women just quit your job and stay home. It's to say men and women. Sometimes the man will be, the homemaker for a while. Sometimes maybe they'll switch off. Sometimes they'll hire daycare, if they have the resources.
Well,
Maybe we
Harrison
should look at
Butker wouldn't
government
allow that,
policy
Eric,
as well. No,
because
I know, but
Harrison Butker says be unapologetic in your masculinity,
yep.
fighting against
But
the
that's
cultural emasculation of men. What?
right. And that is why his message will not have the effect he wants it to have, because it's rooted in those awful stereotypes. And look, there are some women who just don't want to have children, and men too, but we're talking specifically about women here. And so what? And also think about the contributions that we've lost for so long by not having women in the workforce and at least in terms of positions of power and influence. I mean, think about all the amazing things that could have been, the discoveries that could have been made. I mean, God, our politics, I think, could have been better if we would have had a female influence, on our politics up until the last like 20 or 30 years when we really didn't. So there's just so many areas where when he, again, part of his message, and his underlying goal, I agree with. I think his tactics and the way he goes about making his argument just sounds like nails on a chalkboard to people in 2024 that aren't super religious. Like if you're not super religious, that sounds like such outdated, strange thinking to me.
It does. I mean, it continues to shift though. The other thing it made me think of, and I'll just kind of end on this, is like having women on the front lines in the military. As a Marine, that got talked about all the time because, that was during like the Clinton administration. They were talking a lot more about having women, serve in the front lines. And I remember thinking to myself, like, sure, man, if there's a woman who can do it, like, great. But like, if we're going to like lower the bar to make this happen, then probably not so great. And then the more time I really spent in the military, I kind of did land on, I think it's a bad idea for a lot of reasons.
Oh, you think it's a bad idea to have women on the front line fighting?
I do. And the main reason is because I think men become very protective of women. And it creates a lot of conflict, and it creates a lot of problems within the cohesion of your unit. Like, I think we will get there one day, but I think there's a lot more that has to be looked at for that to happen. And I apologize for the tangent, but it really did make me think of that because, you were talking about progress is made. Women could have credit cards and then, thing and on and on and on and on. But, I was trying to find a common ground that I agreed with Harrison Butker on. And that was like the only thing where I was kind of like, I don't know if that's a great idea, but it's more related to like it's combat outcome based. Like,
right. That's like in terms of women's advancement in society, that's like a 99th percentile thing. You know what I mean? It's like, that's like the last frontier.
It really is. G.I. Jane, remember Demi Moore shaving her head off?
Yes, her hair, not her whole. She didn't take her whole.
Shaving her hair.
Just the hair. All right, I wanted to mention this story as well. The International Criminal Court, the prosecutor for the ICC, has applied for arrest warrants for senior Hamas officials, which makes sense after October 7th, but also senior Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, this doesn't mean that there will necessarily be a prosecution because this is just the prosecutor recommending it. It has several more steps to go through, but it's a huge deal that this happened today. The United States has come out against this. The Secretary of State put out a statement. The U.S. fundamentally rejects the announcements today from the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court that he's applying for arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials together with warrants for Hamas terrorists. We reject the prosecutor's equivalence of Israel with Hamas. It is shameful. Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization that carried out the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and is still holding dozens of innocent people hostage, including Americans. The statement goes on from there. That basically is, in a nutshell, my opinion on this. Brian, what do you think?
I think Biden said it's ridiculous. I don't know if I would call it ridiculous. I think if you listen to Amal Clooney, for example, who is one of the
people, is the wife of
George Clooney.
George Clooney, correct?
Who, studies international law and is, I don't study international law, so I tend to lean on experts who are. I think what they're saying is there's enough evidence to suggest that there are potential war crimes there. I think that the narrative has been spun because they've both been charged at the same time. I think that might be a mistake. I think they could have come out very early on and charged Hamas with war crimes, and then later on down the road, separated themselves by having these charges against Netanyahu and some members of the government separately. Do I believe that they've committed war crimes? I don't know, but there are attorneys in international law who believe that they might have. So is that worth exploring? I think that's a fair question to ask.
Here's my problem with this is, look, I'm not saying Israel's executed this war perfectly, okay? And I agree with you that the timing does look bad. It makes it appear as if it's an equivalency, even if maybe they don't mean it that way. But that's what it makes it appear. And that is absolutely, that is ridiculous and ludicrous. Because if you don't see the difference between Hamas and Israel, then, I mean, you are lost.
Yeah,
you're just completely lost and you're brainwashed. I mean, I'm just going to say there's a difference between like, there's a reasonable people can disagree argument, and then there's Hamas is the same thing as Israel. It's absurd.
It is absurd.
But just on let's just focus on Israel, right? And I want to say this: I am no fan of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he has been a disaster for Israel prior to October 7th, on October 7th, and now. I have many disagreements with him. Going after Hamas and trying to kill their leadership and eliminate them as a political organization and a military organization is not a disagreement I have with him. I think he is absolutely right to do that. Virtually everyone in Israel agrees with that, even the people that hate Netanyahu, because they know it's an existential threat to them, not to us. And in America, we would do the same thing. Now, so the war is 100% justified. We have. Now, in terms of the conduct of the war, there have been incidents like the international aid kitchen workers that were killed, which Israel, by the way, apologized for and fired people right away. The way I read the war is, and again, what I have made every decision the same way they did, no, but look what Israel has done. They call people on cell phones, literally call them and say, get out of this building. We are about to bomb it. They send flyers with maps that tell people, here's where you can go. Here is where you shouldn't go. They do. I'm not saying they do everything they can. They do a lot. More than I would dare say America did when we dropped bombs in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? When we went into Mosul in Iraq, we went in to kick ass, okay? And when we did the surge in Mosul, civilians died by the thousands, okay? So my point isn't to try to say that this is the same as that. My point is, I think what is happening here is Israel is being held to a standard that no other military in modern times is being held to, and certainly not a standard that the United States of America was held to. And I think part of it is because it's happening in 2024 with social media and everything on video. And we are seeing the horrors of war, and they are horrors. And your heart breaks for the people of Gaza, most of whom are innocent and have little or nothing to do with Hamas, right? But remember what Hamas does. They commit terror, and then they run and hide inside of and underneath hospitals, schools. They want civilians to be killed because it helps their cause. They're martyrs to the cause. It helps increase the international pressure on Israel. So think about this. You have a group that commits heinous terrorist attacks, then runs and hides with their civilians, freely willing to sacrifice their civilians in order to get a PR win and hopefully get Israel to stop bombing. How do you fight that war? That is almost an impossible situation. And again, do I think Israel's done everything perfect? I don't. But I think they have tried to limit the casualties considering what Hamas does. And it's worth remembering, we killed 100,000-ish civilians in a single day when we dropped the bomb on Japan in 1945. I mean, but I think that was the right call because it saved millions of lives that would have been lost had we invaded mainland Japan. So my point is, war is awful. It's always been awful. Civilians have always died. And if if Israel is committing war crimes in this war, then I think you could argue that pretty much every war that's been waged in modern times has been a war crime. And if that's the case, then the term means nothing, and we
Right.
should just abolish it.
Yeah, I think Bush is a war criminal. You already know that, though.
I see. I don't. But if you do think,
You
if you
thought
think
enhanced
Israel's
interrogation
committing war, I'm not
techniques
saying
were
you. If
covered during
if you plural,
the Versailles Treaty. You think that was part of it? Torture. We're torturing people now. We did. We tortured
no,
people,
I
dude.
think when you're
100%.
when we did when you are in a war
Did you
against
get torture
an
people?
stateless enemy, there was a legal, you know this. I mean, Bush went to the reason Bush was not charged with a crime, other than, you know, we're America,
Right.
is he had documentation, right? They went to the lawyers, and lawyers like, yeah, we think this is good, right? So Bush didn't just say,
And
all
then
right, I'm going to
Kiefer
start
Sutherland
torturing
started
people.
24, and they were just torturing people on
Right.
24 all the time. And that was a thing that happened in America.
And
Anyway, I
also
digress. I
right.
largely agree with you, and you know this. I do think one of the interesting parts of it, though, is that the protests are on college campuses. And if you do the timing on this, I'm not a math whiz, but they weren't alive during 9/11. And I always make this comparison to 9/11 with the Muslim religion in general. But I do that intentionally because I really do believe that's how most Americans think of it. It's just like this blob in the Middle East that is all kind of the same, which if you've been there, you know that that's not the case. But it's kind of the way people think of it, right? Like, I don't really know the difference between Iran and Iraq or Yemen. Like, have someone point to Yemen on a map. Let me know how that goes. But my point is I think that there's a lot of sympathy towards Hamas from younger people because they weren't alive during that time. And I think people our age are less sympathetic, not for any other reason than we experienced 9/11. Am I crazy to have that view?
I think that's part of it. I think the bigger part of it is, though, I think if you view the world as many young liberal people do on college campuses through the world of the colonizer and the colonized, the oppressor and the oppressed, Israel seems like the oppressor and the Palestinians are the oppressed. If you have more of a longer term view, you realize the complicated history of that region, and it's not that simple. But if
Right.
all you
Jews
know
are
is what
clearly
we've seen,
the oppressor. That's, they've always been the
right?
oppressor.
If
They'll
you,
always be. Are you
right.
kidding me?
But no, I think,
Preposterous.
but if you only know the history of the last 20 years, it looks that way because Israel is this incredibly strong democracy with advanced weapons. And the Palestinians are these poor people who are minorities, right? Israelis are white for the most part. And so my point is, if you view the world that way, and
I guess
that's
for the
all
most
you
part.
think of, and and you don't know the history, then you see how that could play out. And I will say, and again, this is why it's weird for me to totally defend Israel because I have a lot of problems with, in particular, this Netanyahu government, which I think is way too extreme. And what they've done in the West Bank with the settlers, I think is shameful. They've basically allowed a culture of violence there in the West Bank with the settlers taking over more and more land. Netanyahu still has not come out for a plan for how to govern Gaza, let alone to how to eventually lead us to a two-state solution. I mean, he's a disaster. But a disaster politically does not make him a war criminal. You can be really bad, but not be a war criminal. And that's my point. I just think that people feel terrible. And again, I think some of it is technology. I mean, if social media had been around in 1945, Truman would probably be brought up as a war criminal. It's George W. Bush, certainly, maybe, as you mentioned, Barack Obama. I mean, how many drone strikes did Obama authorize? Obama's basic policy was, I'm not going to throw troops in for the most part. We're going to go to drone strikes.
Dude, I think it's thousands.
Right. You can agree or disagree with that as a strategy. But what you can say is it didn't kill innocent people. It did. It wasn't soldiers on the ground. Right. It wasn't like soldiers on the ground killing innocent people. It's what happens in war. You make tough decisions. But if you get into this world of moral equivalency and you kind of twist yourself in knots thinking about who we've lost sight of who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. That's one of the problems we have today.
I'm sorry. We only have so much time, but I just hate that. That was one of my major issues with George W. Bush, the good and evil. the good guys and the bad guys. It drives me crazy, man. It really does.
But don't you think there is a general good and a general bad? Like
I don't
Hamas
think
is
there is.
generally bad, right? Israel is generally good. That doesn't mean perfect. That
No,
doesn't mean
no,
immune from criticism.
no,
It
no. I think there, like, if you really want to talk about this, I think that there is a reason that Hamas exists and they act the way that they do. I don't think their actions are justified in any human way. But if you're
no,
asking me if I understand why they are the way they are, my answer is yes. I understand why they are the way they are. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say.
no, I
I,
don't
I'm
either.
not.
But
I'm
I
not
think
saying I agree with their actions. What I'm saying is I don't find them evil. I don't think they're
you don't find
bad.
Hamas evil. No, see, I disagree. I think when you go down that road, because again,
But
here's the
dude,
thing:
that's
if
why you separate yourself because then you can justify the actions you take. When you look at things through the prism of good and evil, you get to be like, I'm on the right side of good. How many people have ever been on the right side of evil that are going, you know what? I'm evil. Aside from Dr. Evil, I don't know of anyone who does
but
that.
that is why it's so important for people to discern and to look at things and to not accept moral equivalencies, because if you don't discern, if you always find the justification for everything, then you can justify anything, right? Like
Right.
if you say, well, Israel is blockaded Gaza, right? Israel is settling in the West Bank, therefore I guess anything goes. I mean, you see how if you get into that cycle, you can kind of justify anything, and it's all the same, and it's people just trying to live in their
I
best
do,
interest.
man. And
But
I'm
if you
I'm I'm
you
not
have
trying to
to have
solve
some
the issue in the
judgment,
Middle East on our podcast.
right?
But what I am trying to
What are you
do,
talking about?
what I am
We can
trying to
do that,
do is say that I think I have this trigger with when people say good and evil or good and bad. Like,
right?
no, like no one has ever thought they were evil. Everyone thinks they're good. Like they just do.
Right.
That's how they justify the actions that they have. But if, like I said, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, man, but if you ask me why Hamas, how it came to be, what they are, if I understand it, I do. That doesn't mean I think that they should have free reign. I would like to see Hamas wiped off the face of the earth, but I don't know, man. It's the way that we people talk about it that I have the issue with the most.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's switch gears here. Talk about a slightly lighter subject, the NBA playoffs. Wow, we have our Final Four set now, Brian. Great
Slightly
transition
lighter.
there. Pair of game sevens yesterday where the road team won both. The Pacers beat the Knicks to advance, and the Timberwolves, this was a bit of a surprise, beat the Nuggets in Denver, a game that the Nuggets led by 20 points in the third quarter. Minnesota, the Young Bucks win there. So your conference finals, which will start, we're recording this on Monday, will start tomorrow night, Tuesday. The Celtics will host the Pacers. Celtics, obviously, a big favorite there.
Yeah.
And the Timberwolves will host the Mavericks. Minnesota, a slight favorite in that series. What do you think about the Final Four in the NBA?
Well, since I know it was 2 weeks ago, but I think we like hoed some of this field already. Obviously, a lot of new faces, new places. One not new face, Kyrie Irving, man. Like, I think he's home in Dallas. You kind of wondered after he won a championship in Cleveland and then bounced between Boston and New Jersey if this guy would ever really figure it out. He's kind of become a leader there in Dallas. And, when you have him and Luca, that's a heck of a duo. I thought the interesting part about Minnesota was when Rudy Gobert was signed, everyone said how terrible of a signing that was. And it turns out Gobert was the difference maker in beating the Nuggets because he could guard the Joker.
Yeah.
And then my last thought on it in general is if Indiana beats Boston, I mean, my God, I don't know. I don't gamble on sports, but I would imagine Boston, if you bet $100, you'd make $1 on that series. I don't think you'd make very much. They got to be a huge favorite. I mean, good for Indiana for being the Knicks, but the Knicks taking it to 7 with their depleted roster, that was pretty impressive anyway.
Yeah, the Celtics, at least in game one, are a 10.5 point favorite, and they're minus 470, which means you'd have to bet $470 to win 100 on the Celtics. The
Yeah.
Pacers are plus 360 for that game. So, yeah, I think look, barring something miraculous, it's going to be the Celtics. In the West, you're right. I mean, Luka, and if he's healthy, and that's a big thing because he's clearly been playing on a bit of an injured knee. With Luka and Kyrie, they have a shot against Minnesota for sure because the supporting cast has stepped up too for Dallas, better than I think Luka's ever had around him. But the Timberwolves, man, are just so deep and so good defensively. And you mentioned
Yeah,
it,
Gobert.
having that length of Karl Anthony Towns and Gobert. That's the key. Just one of them, Djokovic would have fouled out probably. In fact, Gobert did foul out. But the fact that you had both, you had
Yeah.
12 fouls with those two guys. Plus, they have Naz Reid, coming off the bench. He's, he plays like a guard, but he's 7'1", and he really was a huge difference in that game because their best player did. When you play a game 7 on the road and your best player, Anthony Edwards, shoots, I think he was 4 of 16 from the field
I think it
and
was
had
6
like
of 24,
16
buddy.
points, or 6 of 24. You're right, 6 of 24, and you lose or you win and you're down 20 in the third quarter. That shows you how deep that team was and how good they are defensively. They were the best defensive team in the league all year, so they're moving on. We will have a new champion. Who do you think it'll be out of these Final Four? Do you think it'll be the Celtics?
I don't know. I mean,
think it's.
I think I don't know.
I think it's going to be the Celtics in Minnesota. I think Minnesota
You know
is going to
what?
do enough defensively to lock down Luka and Kyrie.
This is what I wanted to talk to you about. It'll be the sixth, no matter who wins, it'll be the sixth champion in 6 years. And I think the sports talk radio, which you were once on conversation,
I was.
is our dynasties good for the NBA? I say they are. I think having this type of parity is actually bad for basketball. And the reason that I'm saying this is just based on viewers. Every other sport is through the roof. Baseball, football, football, soccer, tennis, it doesn't matter. Golf, everything is up, 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 up. More money, 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 money. And the NBA is kind of flat. It's really weird. And I think part of that is because we're going to have the sixth champion in 6 years.
Yeah, it's dynasties and it's stars, man. That's what defines the NBA more than any other sport because there's only a few players on the floor at a time, and the biggest players dominate the ball, and they're the stars. The NBA, I think, is more dependent than any league, probably any of the major leagues, on stars, probably by a long shot. I don't think there's a close second. And they think about the stars that have dominated the sport, Bird and Magic in the 80s, and then Jordan, of course, and Kobe and LeBron and Shaq. And you've had these same people and these same teams. And this year, in recent years, you haven't had that. No. And I think that does matter. I think it matters to not have the Lakers, the Celtics, the Warriors, Durant, not have, well, I guess you do have the Celtics now, but it's a different Celtics. It's not been a dynasty level Celtics. I think you're right. And I wonder what the NBA needs to do, because some level of parity is good. Like, you want to have teams have a chance. And in that regard, the NBA has done a good job, because for a long time, the teams that were always good were pretty much always good, and the teams that were always bad were pretty much always bad. And you have seen this change. We talked about Minnesota. How about Oklahoma City? They had a nice run. Indiana. Now you're getting different teams, and that's good for the local fan bases for sure. But man, if you're the NBA, wouldn't you have rather had the Knicks, for instance, and the Celtics, and LeBron maybe make one more run with the Lakers? Especially when you're, as we talked about in our show a couple weeks ago, you're in the middle of trying to negotiate a new TV deal. The current one expires after next season.
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much summed it up in terms of like the stars and the contracts. I think the NBA is still going to get a ton of money, because at the end of the day, there's lots of room for commercials, and most importantly, there's lots of room for live betting. So I think the NBA is going to do just fine in terms of the money it receives. I think the best case scenario at this point would be the best case scenario for the NBA will occur, because it's very likely that either Tatum will be a champion, Luka will be a champion, or that young Minnesota team will be a champion. And then, they'll put the advertising dollars into Ant or whoever from Minnesota that they need to make it work. So, we're going to have a new champ and new stars, and we'll all just have to get used to it. I mean, I haven't watched very much NBA playoffs at all. I did watch the game sevens this weekend, but like that, at this point as a sports fan, that's what it takes, man. It takes game 7 of the semifinals to get me to be like, I'm going to tune into an NBA game.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it too is just LeBron, like because you have such a singular, like, generational talent who literally for 8 straight years he was in the finals. Then he missed a year, and then I think they won the championship. So I think it went with the Lakers. So I think it would have been 9 finals in 10 years, which is incredible. He's always there. He's the most popular player, the best player. And now for 4 years, he hasn't been there and rarely making deep playoff runs, really only last year when they got to the Western Conference Finals. And it's hard to nobody could replace Jordan, nobody. And then you had Kobe and then you had LeBron. So you had guys came up, but who's the next guy? There are a lot of great players. You mentioned a bunch of them. I mean, Jokic is the best player in the league, but he just doesn't. I don't think he has that cachet.
It's
Luka's
not aesthetic.
Great. I just think, well, that too, and also he's foreign born. Luka's same thing.
It's like Dirk.
I don't know.
Dirk was a great player, but he wasn't like Tim Duncan. Same thing. The big fundamental. I mean, there are guys that have had a lot of success in the league who weren't necessarily flashy, but to the point of this conversation, it's the flashy players, the Kobe's, the Allen Iversons.
You know who it might be? Wembanyama. Because of what he does, like this year,
he's
he
fun
was
to watch.
Right. He's already one of the best defensive players in the league. I think next year he will establish himself as one of the top 10 players in the league and probably be that for the next 15 years. And the Spurs will probably be a lot better. So if the Spurs can surround him with enough to make a little bit of a run and get him into the playoffs, because that's really when the stars are made, I think he could be the guy just based on how athletic he is at 7 foot, whatever, and the things that he can do that really nobody else can do. Yeah. I mean, he's 7'4" guy who plays like a guard. I mean, he could be the guy, but I think the NBA needs that guy. They need that guy or a couple of those guys. All right, Brian, let's turn to TV, movies. What have you been watching this week or last couple weeks?
I think that it's so funny. My wife and I are talking about either checking out the show where Michael Douglas plays Benjamin Franklin on Apple, or we're going to rewatch Mad Men. So I think we're probably going to rewatch Mad Men. It's going to happen.
You were doing a Mad Men rewatch.
Well, we haven't started yet. As you know, we have young children. We're very busy with Little League, etc. But we do need to get on the Mad Men train. What have I watched? God, nothing big. That's in the world right now. I mean, what are you watching, buddy?
Well, what I'm watching. Well, first I'm watching two things because there's always what I watch on my own and what I watch with my wife. With my wife, we just completed. Yeah, right. We just completed the 3rd season of Selling the OC, which is a Netflix reality show. I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
It's a spin-off of Selling Sunset, which is the original show. And it's about, it's set with a mortgage group called the Oppenheim Group. And it's actually, I will say, it's really good. Like Netflix does reality TV really well. You know why? Because they understand the concept of less is more with reality. I can't do hour-long reality shows that have like 20 episodes. I'm out. But I can do 8 episodes, 25, 30 minutes, really well paced, shot beautifully. And here's the thing that makes this a good reality show to me is yes, it's about drama and cat fights. Sure. Right. There's some of that. There's a wild thing in this season, spoiler alert, about one of the characters accusing the other character of trying to get him in a threesome with him and his wife and spreading rumors that he and his wife like to engage in, group sex. And so they're going at it. So it's just wild. But the crux of the show is real estate. And so you get to see these incredible homes that they're selling out here, near where I live. This one's set in Orange County, a little bit south of me, and they're just unbelievable. And if you like some of those real estate shows like on HGTV, this is like a souped up version of that because you get to see these 10, 20, 30, $50 million homes that just are unbelievable. It really is. It's like real estate porn is really what this show is with a spice of reality. So I have to say, I would recommend it. I would recommend Selling the OC.
Let me be clear. I love you and I love that you love it. But you were talking and I had a headache the entire time. Like I can't even imagine a scenario if I was in prison and it was the only channel, I probably still wouldn't watch it.
You should check it out. I'm telling you, Netflix knows what they're doing. Love is Blind is another one.
I remember Love is Blind.
Love is Blind is
podcast. Love is Blind is the Eric classic.
I still watch it. I still watch every year. We watch Love Is Blind. This past season was actually really good. It was one of the best seasons they've had. And I'm not a huge reality TV guy, but those two shows work. The other thing, so that's what I'm watching with my wife. What I'm watching myself, I just started, is another Netflix show actually, which this is weird for me because outside of reality or comedy specials, I rarely watch anything on Netflix. Like Netflix, if you've noticed, kind of got out of the prestige TV business like after The Crown. The Crown was probably the last show that was a Netflix like drama or comedy that I watched.
You know
Up
why
and
though, right?
well, to make because I think they thought that they were, better off serving the masses, like getting more things that appealed to more people and not so much going for the prestige shows.
Well, no money. Because producing these shows is so much cheaper than The Crown. Imagine, I've seen The Crown, just the production value, the
Yeah.
actors and actresses, the costume design, the locations that they shoot. Reality TV, you're just sort of like, hey, you're hot. Do you want to be famous? You're just going to say, and everyone's like, well, shit, I'm a waitress. I might as
Right.
well go on this show and, get my 15 minutes of fame. They pay them nothing, and then there's your show.
But the show that I did start to watch the other day on Netflix, Ripley. I watched the first 3 episodes. Chef's kiss. It is. I'm gonna. I don't know how many episodes there are out right now. I've seen the first 3. I'm gonna continue watching it. So, are you? Did you ever see the? I never read the book, but I saw the Talented Mr. Ripley. I believe that was Matt
That was Matt
Damon,
Damon and the great Philip Seymour
Philip
Hoffman.
Seymour Hoffman, and I loved the movie, even though it's like 20 years old. I still remember thinking this was
I don't think he
fantastic.
did, but Philip Seymour Hoffman should have won an Oscar for that. I don't
He
think
was
he
so
did.
good. He
I
was
mean, he
so
won as
good.
like Capote, but whatever. But he was amazing.
He was
We're
so good.
so old.
So I was familiar with the story, but I hadn't seen the movie in like 20 years. And I will say, I actually, as much as I really like the movie, I like the TV show more so far.
Hmm.
And the reason is just because of what you can do in TV.
Yes.
The way they take their time to tell this story is brilliant to me. Some people, I was wondering if, because some of the scenes are by kind of, if you're used to like watching action movies or a lot of the short attention span stuff we see now, you might think it's slow. I didn't because I appreciated the precision and the beauty of the filmmaking. Like they just take their time. They set it up. They show you, and they don't do it through flashback. They do it through taking you through the life of Tom Ripley before he goes to Europe. So if you're not familiar with the story of the Talented Mr., which I believe it is based on a book. There's Tom Ripley is a down on your luck guy in America in like the late 50s, early 60s. He goes to Europe and tries to persuade a spoiled rich kid to come back to America at the behest of that kid's parents. And from there, you see kind of the weird relationship between the two of them and also the spoiled rich kid's girlfriend. So Ripley's played by Andrew Scott in this show. Phenomenal. Dakota Fanning plays the main female lead in the show. It is first, we'll see if they stick the landing. It's a limited series, so it's not coming back. It just tells that story. So far, 3 episodes in, outstanding. It's shot in all black and white. So again, if that's not your thing, slower pace show, black and white, you might not like it. But if you love just shows that are, I mean, the word that comes to mind is craftsmanship. Like this show, you can tell that this was really smart people, talented people who just took their time and meticulously made what I think so far, at least, is a brilliant show. Ripley on Netflix. Check it out.
I like, as you said, the format of television to really like dig in and tell a story. And it makes me think of how many movies have there been where you're like, man, this would be so much better as like a television miniseries. If they
Mm-hmm.
actually had time to like go through and develop these characters. Like they're doing the Dune movies now, and there's going to be 3 movies. And in watching those movies, I think, man, this would be a just ridiculously awesome television show.
Yeah.
So they could like really, really delve into it. Um, there's even classic movies, and you may disagree with me on this one, but I think Star Wars would have been much better as a long format television show than it was in the movies, particularly, 7, 8, and 9. I think they could have done a lot more with those in storytelling if they would have taken the time to like really develop the characters, get into their background, and do it more. They could have like quadrupled the screen time for some of these characters that people really liked and enjoyed, but instead they tried to pack it into 3 2-hour movies. But I digress.
No, I think that's a great point. I especially like look, 7, 8, 9 were such a disaster. Anything
Yeah.
could have made them better. But I agree, they were trying to do so much
Yeah, you're
that
trying
they
to do too much.
yeah, they're trying to do too much. I agree with you. I think there are some movies that would be better as TV shows, and probably vice versa. Some TV shows that would be better as movies.
Yeah.
Ripley was one of those ones when I watched the original, the movie, The Talented Mr. Ripley, I thought this is really good, and I felt
Yeah.
like it was pretty well rounded and well done. But now that I'm watching this as a TV show, I'm like, man, I didn't even think about all the different ways but it really does, and it makes it makes the big plot points hit even harder because you see they have time to tell that story and really delve into the relationship and kind of a little bit of the backstory about who Tom Ripley is, so that you kind of get to know him a little bit and what makes him tick before he's thrust into this scene in Europe in the 1960s. But yeah, I definitely check it out. I think you in
All
particular
right.
would really
I'll check
like
it
it.
out.
A man of your sophisticated cinematic
Oh,
taste.
absolutely.
I think you could sit down with a nice bottle of wine,
Oh, I like that.
three,
I
four
like it
hundred dollar
already.
bottle of wine. Yeah, just kick your feet up in your mansion and just put it on the home theater system, and you really, I think,
I
would
can do
enjoy
that.
it. Any closing thoughts, Brian, before we leave for the week?
No, this was a heavy episode, man. We talked about some pretty rough things, but we stuck the landing, as you said.
That's what we do here. We go from serious to not so serious. Look, any show, I dare anyone to find another show that will talk about the International Criminal Court, Israel's war
The
in
Hague.
Gaza, The Hague, Harrison Butker's comments about marriage or about children and what should be the traditional role of women, the NBA playoffs, Ripley,
Mm-hmm.
and if TV shows should be movies and movies should be TV shows. I mean, come on. Is there
We
another
covered the
podcast
gamut.
that exists?
There is not.
No, we really did run the full gamut. Now, whether we did it effectively or interestingly, I don't know. But that's very, very debatable. But we did it. We did it. Thanks for listening. Make sure you follow us on Apple Podcasts and, of course, on YouTube. For Brian Johnson, I'm Eric Messersmith. We hope that you enjoyed the show, but if not, please take no offense.